Hey, it's Sam Konnert, and today we are talking politics, confusing, isolating, frustrating politics. This week, if you found yourself fighting with your dearest friends and family over politics, you're not alone. But these fights are becoming less about who should be prime minister. They feel deeper than that. That's this episode after the break. Do you have headphones by any chance?
So I do on my, wasn't able to get these connected, and I broke my hardwired ones I broke as I was unraveling them to use them here. I might have another set if you give me do you have 1 minute while I can try to get, okay.
That's Chris. He's an auditor in Calgary. He's in his mid-60s, and he just got back from a work trip.
Spent the week on the road last week, just visiting some of our facilities out there, which I love doing. I love actually being in the operations. It's my happy place when I actually get to be in the operations.
Chris is also one of my best friend's dad. I have known him for 25 years. I've had so many birthday parties at his house. We've gone on a ton of camping trips. I even got drunk at his house for the first time. I don't know if he knows that, but he's like my second family. Earlier this spring, when I was visiting home, I ended up at his house in Calgary, and he was pretty shaken after a disagreement with his neighbor. They've been friends for over 20 years. Let's call him Frank.
Very social, very outgoing, has lots of stories, good storyteller. He's raised good kids. They're all thoughtful and kind, and some in the social services. Just a good family. If I asked him for help with anything, he'd be there.
I actually know Frank. I've known him for almost as long as I've known Chris. I actually wanted to ask Frank's daughter to the grade 6 dance, but my friend Derek beat me to it. Frank did super well for himself in the oil business, and everything Chris was saying about him was true. He's a really good guy.
We always have gotten along. We do a lot with them pretty regularly. Have barbecues together, hang out on each other's decks, have a drink, go hiking sometimes, play pickleball. Some hikes that we've done have been just absolutely lovely in the mountains. Spending a day with friends out there is always very memorable.
They have a lot in common, and they get along really, really well. That's why Chris had a hard time sharing his story. In fact, we're not even using Chris's real name, but he's just baffled over how things escalated over, you guessed it, politics.
There was some civic politics that started to emerge in our discussions that were a little more divisive, I would say. What I noticed is that he started to talk very strongly in opposition to that kind of stuff. And there would be swearing, there would be, this fucking guy needs to go. Somebody should just shoot him in the leg and make him go away, or just pretty intense language. That's something that I just didn't seem to warrant intensity.
That all started about 10 years ago, and the tensions kept simmering under the surface. And then Trudeau stepped down.
After Carney won the Liberal leadership and the election was called, and we hadn't seen each other for probably about a month or so. They'd been away, and so I just popped over having a glass of wine. And I don't know what it was that, I think just because the election was top of mind for everybody at that point, and he started to talk about how we needed to make sure that we got rid of any vestige of liberalism. It just escalated. I don't think I said anything for about 20 minutes. And he was just kind of a rant. Carney should be disposed of. I think I said, there's a very good chance I'm voting for Carney this time, Frank. And I talked about the fact that I would choose Canada over Alberta. And that just absolutely set him off. There's no fucking way we should do that. We're getting screwed, and goddamn Quebec and goddamn Ontario, those leeches.
Chris and Frank are like so many Canadians whose political divides are growing. But it's one thing to disagree about something like the budget, for example. Now it just feels like it's cutting deeper. The differences are down to core values and character and behavior, and they're just too big to ignore.
I did come home afterwards just going, oh my goodness, have I lost a friend? He was so angry because this time he responded to something that I said in such an angry way. It felt, oh my God, I don't know, we might not talk again.
This fight wasn't even over some crazy right-wing conspiracy. I'm not talking about a QAnon true believer or an ancient aliens proselytizer. It's not crazy like that. They just voted for different parties, the basis of our democracy. And Chris is a pretty middle-of-the-road kind of guy.
I can vote conservative, I can vote liberal, I can vote NDP, I can, depending on kind of where the country's at, where the province is at, and the leaders themselves. I like to think that I'm a thinker. I'm not taking anybody's word for anything. I want to think my way through things, and hence why I'm somewhat flexible. Frank, on the other hand, has always been very fiscally conservative. And at a political level, I would say that he is socially conservative as well, but at an individual level, he's a super nice guy and would treat everybody well and would never discriminate against anybody. My experience with not just him, but kind of with others, is that they are so focused. They're so focused on their perspective that they're not hearing anything else. It absolutely was sad. I was upset about it for sure.
To be honest, I was pretty shocked to hear about this blow up, but I was also surprised that Chris wanted to talk about it with me on air.
I don't know. I guess it's on some hope that people will reflect about the hardness of their stance. I guess I haven't given up all hope of that. I'm very much down the middle kind of guy. The part that I'm not down the middle on is I think that people should help each other. I just have this deep and abiding belief that working together is a better way for society to grow and develop. It's not good for society to have fractured relationships. So it worries me that there will be more of that happening.
This happened to Chris, but it's also happened to me, and I'm assuming it's probably happened to you too. It could be a close friend, it could be a neighbor, a partner, or even your parents suddenly getting angry or worked up or yelling over a political conversation that would have been totally normal a few years ago. So how can you save these relationships? To answer that, I reached out to Ryan Broderick. He writes a newsletter called Garbage Day and hosts a podcast called Panic World. He writes about this a lot, and he writes about parents that have gone down dangerous rabbit holes into Holocaust denialism. He's written about friends that have fallen in love with Nazi punk music that he just had to cut out of his life. His dad is also a Trump supporter, which is tough for him. Ryan's an expert in having these tough conversations, and after the break, he's going to give you his best advice on how to handle them. Ryan Broderick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So you do a lot of reporting on kind of conspiracies and rabbit hole stuff, and I see a lot of stories from you of people falling victim to some pretty intense political beliefs that affect their relationships. I just want to know off the bat, what type of people are susceptible to losing friends and family over their politics?
I don't think there is a kind of person. I mean, at least demographically, we're talking young, we're talking old. We are talking left and right. I hate to be the centrist there about this, but it is a thing that impacts kind of anybody depending on political spectrum. The only thing that I've seen really linking this stuff is isolation. So, if you are someone who goes through a period where you're alone a lot or you feel alienated from your IRL community, you start looking at stuff online, or the stuff you're looking at online starts to isolate you because you kind of like it or you're interested in it. It seems that's the major trigger, but anything else is kind of up in the air. I've seen this across countries. I've seen this across ages. Again, political spectrums. It's a fairly universal thing, I think, at this point.
Yeah, so like recent retirees, things like that. People have just lost their jobs. Yeah.
Huge thing for recent retirees. College kids also, you have that kind of like first couple of years of college where you feel very alone and weird.
In my head, it used to be like 5-6 years ago, people developed a lot of these kind of fanatical beliefs online. I'm thinking like QAnon, Pizzagate, that kind of stuff. But I feel like it's happening more and more to the regular news consumer. Is that a fair thing to say, that it's kind of transitioned a little bit?
Yeah, I think that is fair. My theory on this is actually that it's due to the way news is delivered now. So, if you go back 20 years, for the most part, most people are either hearing news just through osmosis in the radio, through their friends, whatever, or they're reading a newspaper or they're watching TV, right? And then we have the big digital media explosion of the 2000s and 2010s. And then that kind of all falls apart around COVID for a variety of reasons. And so nowadays, most people are getting news stories, like let's say like the Pope's conclave, right? Chances are the average person is not sitting down and reading one story about the papal conclave. They're seeing bits and pieces of it mixed it together with memes and videos and takes all in different feeds. And I always think of that Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode where Charlie Kelly has like the big wall behind him. And he's like, look, here's how it all connects.
This company is being bled like a stuffed pig, Mac, and I got a paper trail to prove it. Check this out. Take a look at this.
Jesus Christ,
That right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay?
And I think that is what we've done to information, even good information. The average person has become the editor of their own news cycle, their own information ecosystem. And I do think there's something inherently conspiratorial about that because you're piecing it all together, even if you're not trying to. Like the human brain just does that. Even me, I spend all day looking at this stuff. And there's certain stories that are happening in the background where I'm like, what is happening there? Like what's going on with Diddy's trial? Like, in fact, I thought a thing was totally fake about that trial the other day. And then my friend was like, no, that's real. And I looked it up and it was real. I did not believe that like Diddy was sneaking into Kid Cudi's house to like open his Christmas presents. But apparently that did happen. And so like, I was like, oh, that's funny. Like I didn't believe that.
I'm assuming it kind of reaffirms your biases because you're reading bits and pieces from places that are reaffirming it. And even if they're not reaffirming it, you're picking out the one sentence that you like.
For sure. And also, I mean, there was a big movement in the 2010s to kind of blame the average person for misinformation, which I think is just such a cop-out and so annoying. And I hated it when it was happening. I still hate it now.
Sorry, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, there were all of these like misinformation reporters that are popping up being like, here's how you have to like deal with misinformation. Don't share something you can't verify. And it's like, why is the average person responsible for that? That's a ridiculous thing. That's a patently ridiculous thing. That's like saying like, hey, there's toxic sludge in your tap water. Like it should be up to you to fix that. And it's like, no, like that's a platform level problem. That's an industry level problem for the media. These are not like, and so now we've found ourselves in a world where most of the information that the average person is receiving is being shared or curated or remixed or riffed on by other normal people. Like the people in your Instagram reels, most of them are not professionals in any capacity. So I sympathize and I sort of understand how we've ended up here because it's just a lot of people without any particular media training or interest in media training or expertise, just delivering content to other people who also don't have that.
At what point do you see these views start to affect personal relationships? Is there a certain trigger? Like we just had an election in Canada, and I think that brought a lot of stuff to the surface.
Yeah, there is a trigger. I feel like the majority of the time, it's that you've seen something online and you believe it either because it's captivating or it reaffirms your biases, as you said, or it sort of emotionally gratifies something in you. You kind of like it and you believe it. Okay. And then what happens is you trot that out in public or on a public feed or in a conversation with somebody and they challenge it. And some people go, okay, like maybe you're right, but you could also go the other direction and sort of double down. And the double down effect seems to be where things fall apart. And if it happens in public, I think there's less of a likelihood that will happen. But if you're talking to someone in a group setting or on public social feeds, that's a hard thing to say. Like, oh, I've been duped.
It's a humbling feeling to have someone tell you in person you're wrong. And like a lot of people will be like, no, I'm not, just because you have that gut reaction. Right.
I've never experienced that, but I've heard it's brutal. I'm never wrong.
Nobody ever tells you you're wrong.
Yeah,
Same here. So earlier this episode, we heard from Chris, who's having trouble with his longtime friend and neighbor. What strategies do you recommend to him to talk to someone that just doesn't want to listen? And you just can't have a civil conversation with that person. Like at some point you have to cut them off, but just before you cut them off, what can you try?
Sure. I mean, I talk about my dad being a Trump supporter pretty often. We have civil conversations about it. it's been a years long learning process for me about how to talk to him and deal with him. We're having a weeks long simmering argument about the tariffs right now that are coming out. I apologize to Canada. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
He thinks they're going to be a great success for everybody. And it's just it's a process. And I've learned a lot about how to deal with that, where you draw the line, how you continue the relationship. And he's not like a MAGA extremist, but he was like a normal Republican who is now an abnormal Republican, which are now normal Republicans, right? So I've definitely experienced that. Also, as a reporter, like I've interviewed, everything from incels to Richard Spencer to every extremist you can imagine. I've talked to these people. I find them repulsive, but I'm also curious, like how they see themselves. I find that interesting, and it's just a lot of cognitive dissonance. It's a lot of sort of talking in circles. And you do eventually have to go, like, you throw your hands up and be like, I can't, there's nothing here. You've talked yourself into a circle. I know people who like got really extremist about COVID, right? And like, that's a thing. Like, you just sort of have to move really slowly with it and figure out where your boundaries are, because there's not a lot you can do at the end of the day.
Yeah, so the guy we had on earlier in the show, he had a falling out with his neighbor, and they got into a bit of a yelling match over just the recent election and things like that. It wasn't down the rabbit hole extremist or anything, but now they feel like he feels like he can't even touch a topic, and it's all very surface level conversations. And I was just wondering, like you with your dad, what strategies do you recommend to someone that just doesn't want to listen? And you feel like you can't have a civil conversation. Like at some point you have to cut them off, but before that.
Sure. I mean, it's different depending on the relationship and what you want out of it, right? So first of all, I'm not a counselor of any kind. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a guy who spends a lot of time on the internet.
But you're never wrong.
And I'm never wrong. But what I can say is, okay, if it's someone like your neighbor, like, I don't know, maybe this is like not woke to say, but like, you don't have to talk about politics with your neighbor. Maybe, I don't know. I would not come back with him with like facts and figures and posts. I would just sort of move on and be like, how's your lawn or whatever.
Yeah.
So if they're friends, one way I've sort of found to deal with some of this, and it really depends on the friendship, depends on the relationship. Like, you can, I feel like this dynamic used to like exist in the 90s. Like, you can like find a way to joke about that with each other. Like, you can, like, I feel like there used to be like a time where like everyone had like their one weird conservative friend, or like in red states here, like there's like the stereotype of like having the lefty friend. Like, it's what it really is like, can you use the dynamics and the language of your friendship to like find a way through this? And obviously there are lines, and like if they're crossed for you, like they're crossed for you, and there's nothing you can do. But I don't totally see that as something that like is like damaged forever. Like, it also could just be like the election was really soon. You got to wait a bit. Also, Mark Carney is a politician. Politicians are all bad no matter what. He could screw up, and then that friend could laugh at him. Like, there's ways about voting for him. Like, there's ways that this could go. But I do think moving slowly with compassion, trying to be understanding, but also being like very aware of like your own boundaries. Like, that's kind of all you can do. And I'm sorry that sounds so like corny and kumbaya, okay. But like, yeah, I think that's kind of it.
Do you think the idea of agreeing to disagree is dated? Like, do you think it's changed in a way that just doesn't exist anymore?
If we're talking about normal people who do not want like the extermination of some like racial group or minority,
yeah,
maybe. Maybe. Like, there's like never going to be a world where every single person on earth shares your political beliefs, no matter what they are. Like, it's just not possible. And I don't think we'd want that world, actually, or an attempt to build that world. I think it'd be kind of scary. But if we're talking about like people who are not extremists, but people who have been spun around by some weird stuff they saw online, or by like the way the news is broken now, I kind of do think you have to have a bit of patience for that.
And for people that are kind of fearing that their loved ones or their friends are just going down this extremist pipeline or anywhere down that direction, what should they look out for?
Yes, you don't have to be like a perfect curator of information on the internet, but I do think it is worth keeping up with certain dog whistles, right? Like the equivalent of this 10 years ago would be like, you should know like Pepe the Frog is not a cute frog cartoon. It's like a Nazi dog whistle, right? Like you should know certain things, you know, if you're going to exist in the world now.
Seed oils.
Yeah. Seed oils is a big one. Anything with the letter Q. I mean, like there's certain things that you could also, you know, maybe go the other way, because I really do hate putting the onus on the average person for this stuff, which is like, if your friend or your loved one is saying things that are confusing and odd to you, and it seems like the common denominator there is that they're looking at this stuff on the internet, I think a lot of people's first reaction is to kind of attack, right? And be like, that's wrong, or that's crazy, or like, that's inappropriate. I would almost say, like, if you care about this person, and you care about, and that's a big if, and you care about the relationship that you have with this person, I think your first instinct there is wrong. And actually what you should do is maybe like take a beat, go like try to look up what they're looking at and get a sense of like what it is. Because I do think there's like my fear with all this stuff is that if you go for attack in the first conversation about this stuff, you push them deeper down. The other thing to look out for is that like there's kind of like there's like a way that like people talk when they talk about the internet. I sort of just compare it to like describing a dream sometimes, like, because it's like the details make total sense when you're like looking at it on your phone or your computer, but then when you talk about it out loud, you sound like an absolute maniac. And I do think people realize that.
It's good to keep bringing it up in person too, because when they have to vocalize it, it often sounds different than when you're reading it in your head.
I mean, have you ever tried to explain a meme out loud? It's mortifying.
Yeah.
It's absolutely mortifying. And so like, yeah, make these people feel like a little embarrassed about it, but to a point, because then you don't want them to just like totally disengage from real life, because that's when like things really speed up, I think. At the beginning of the far right populism wave, let's call it, like in 2014, 2015, as the world was kind of radicalizing around different social platforms, I think the first instinct for a lot of young millennials at the time was to go on the offensive. And I totally get it. I totally get it. And when you're talking about someone who like does not believe in the dignity or sort of like the existence of you, let's say if you're like a person of color or a queer person, like I totally understand why this stuff is frightening. But unfortunately now we're at a point where it's like the toxic sludge has filled up the entire planet. And there are people who I think normally would have never radicalized, who are ingesting Andrew Tate clips on Instagram, and you know they don't know what they're looking at. And I'm now like, my mind is starting to think that we should start treating this a little more, not compassionately, but like empathetically, maybe like, cause it's just everywhere. And it's getting to younger and younger people, which makes me really worried. Like we have to figure out a way to plug the spewing, I don't know, toxic gas that's coming out of the internet all the time now. I don't know how else to compare this.
Ryan Broderick, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Going back to our first conversation, how did it turn out for Chris?
It's good. We've been together a couple of times and had fun, but there's just no discussion. I think the last time we were there, he made one political comment and I just stayed silent, and there wasn't more. I think if he had said more, I would have just said, we can't talk about this. I do think it does inhibit the relationship some from growing. Yeah. Anytime you have to avoid topics, I think it inhibits the relationship some. Yeah.
It's a friendship, but with an asterisk. All right, that has been This Week in Canadian Politics. I will see you next week. Please let us know what you're pissed off about, what you're watching closely, and what you want to hear about on this show. You can email me at sam@canadaland.com. And please remember to hit that subscribe button and like the episodes. And you know what? While you're at it, you can share it with your friends. It really helps. Thanks a lot.